you can't escape it when you grow up in India. You just cannot escape connection to something bigger. And that's the gift of the land that I come from. So I grew up in the foothills near Haridwar, up even above Rishikesh. I grew up on the banks of the Alaknanda River, where the Ganges come down through the mountains. And I can still feel my body light up when I feel the land that made me. And growing up in India has definitely shaped everything in how I see, how I feel, how I experience life. So when you grow up in India, you're surrounded by a culture that is full of worshiping, of prayer, of common turns of phrase, like you can't escape this continuity of consciousness that's sort of built in the way we receive water, the way we eat food, the way we feed the cow before you eat your own lunch, like the way you store water, the way you celebrate not one, not two, but like 3, 4 festivals a month: full moon, new moon, Ekadashi, fasting. There's ritual, there's so much importance given to ceremony. When I was really young, I had this really deep connection to God. I was just drawn to it. I read books about realized yogis. That was what I did as a 7-year-old. And there was a time where I split away from that innocent, clear, loving recognition of grace, because I started to see that the people around me couldn't explain to me why we were doing what we were doing. Why were we worshiping the way we were worshiping? Why was God real? I didn't understand, I wanted to, but it took me a long time to come back to my Indian roots and actually make sense of them. I had to reject the whole thing and try to understand it. This was the grave mistake of science in retrospect, right? I set out to understand that which I had a feeling, knowing sense of. I started to question the practices, the way of speaking, and the way of being that was modeled around me, because it didn't make sense. And it was years and years of searching. My big opening began where at some point in my 20s, I remember starting to read the Gita. And when I met the Gita, every shloka, every word of Sanskrit, every line was just so profound. I couldn't understand it, but I felt this incredible power of it. Right? Like it touched me. I wanted to read the Gita in Sanskrit and transcribe it in my own writing. So I was sitting there and I would write one shlok and it would send me. Right? Like there's such a rich encoding of that wisdom. It's a transmission and it lives in our bones, right? So growing up in India, you can't escape connection to the ceremonial field. There's always attention to, in the subconscious, in the conscious, to something greater that's working with you. My parents modeled this, right? So I've come from a land that lives this wisdom. And coming to the States, one of the things that is most striking here is how little attention there is in the culture as a whole to that interconnectedness, to that ceremonial field, to the field of there is something greater that is good, that is working with and for us. Attention to the understanding that I'm not doing this alone and it's not all in my hands. That I am part of something bigger is singing through me, through us all, and I am not fully in charge. I'm just a player in the game of life. And a lot of my suffering and those around me, I think, is about trying to reconcile, for me personally, trying to reconcile these two very different ways of seeing, feeling, experiencing, right? I had to go through the circle of rejecting that like underlying so it is assumption that there is grace, that we are connected, that there is the hand of God or life or the universe that is benevolent, that's working through us, and to really try to make sense of how to do this thing of being here alone, trying to be a self-made, I was going to say man. And at this point, I can see how much each has to learn from the other. Each paradigm has to learn from the other. The marrying of the human heart and the intellect through this vessel, through this body, through the medicine of community, through the medicine of the land, the actual intelligent lands that we inhabit, the natural world.